The HOA meeting was supposed to be routine, but when the power-hungry board members pushed too far, I knew I had to step in. As the self-appointed neighborhood sheriff, I had seen their antics before, but this time they'd gone too far. I gripped the arms of my chair, steeling myself for the confrontation to come. Little did they know, I was about to deliver a dose of instant karma that would leave them reeling. The air was thick with tension as I walked into the community center. I could feel the glares of the HOA board members boring into me, but I refused to be intimidated. This was my neighborhood, and I wasn't about to let a bunch of power-hungry wannabes trample all over it. "All right, let's get this meeting started," barked Brenda, the self-appointed HOA president. She shot me a pointed look, daring me to challenge her authority. "First up, we have a few new rules to discuss." I rolled my eyes. Here we go again. "As you all know, we've been having issues with some residents not maintaining their properties to our standards," Brenda continued, her gaze sweeping the room. "So, we're introducing a new policy. Any homeowner with unkempt yards or unacceptable exterior paint jobs will be fined. And if they don't comply within 30 days, we'll have the work done and bill them." A murmur of discontent rippled through the crowd, but Brenda raised her hand, silencing them. "This is for the good of the community. We can't have people dragging down property values with their sloppy homes." I couldn't hold my tongue any longer. And who exactly gets to decide what's unkempt or unacceptable? I challenged, rising from my seat. Last I checked, this was a free country, not a dictatorship. Brenda's face flushed with anger. "We're the HOA board, and we have the authority to make these decisions," she snapped. "If you have a problem with it, you're welcome to leave." I stepped forward, my eyes narrowing. "Oh, I have a problem with it, all right. And I'm not going anywhere." I turned to the crowd, sensing their growing unease. This isn't about maintaining property values. It's about a small group of people trying to flex their muscle and bully the rest of us. Brenda opened her mouth to retort, but I held up my hand. "Save it. We all know what's really going on here. You're using your position on the board to settle personal vendettas and make yourselves feel important. Well, I've got news for you. This isn't your fiefdom, and we're not your serfs." The room erupted into applause, and I could see the panic flickering in Brenda's eyes. She hadn't expected this level of resistance. "That's enough," she shouted, her voice trembling. "This meeting is adjourned. We'll reconvene tomorrow to discuss these new policies further." As the crowd filed out, murmuring and casting angry glances at the board, I caught Brenda's eye. "This isn't over, you know," she hissed. "You may think you're the big shot around here, but we're not going to back down that easily." I simply smiled. "Bring it on," I said, turning to leave. "I'll be waiting." The next day, the HOA board members were back, their faces twisted with determination. Brenda stepped up to the podium, her eyes sweeping the room. "All right, let's try this again," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "As I was saying, we have some new policies to discuss regarding property maintenance. And this time, I don't want any interruptions." She glared at me, daring me to speak up. But I simply leaned back in my chair, a small smile playing on my lips. Let them have their moment, for now. "First of all, we've decided to increase the fines for non-compliance," Brenda continued. "If your yard isn't up to par, or your home's exterior isn't up to our standards, you'll be facing a $500 penalty. And if you don't fix the issue within 30 days, we'll have the work done and bill you double." A collective gasp went through the crowd, and I could see the panic in their eyes. $500 was a hefty sum, and for many of these homeowners, it was more than they could afford. "Now, I know this may seem harsh," Brenda said, feigning sympathy. "But it's for the good of the community. We can't have a few bad apples dragging down everyone else's property values." I couldn't hold my tongue any longer. And who gets to decide what up to par means? I challenged, rising from my seat. Last I checked, this was still a free country, not some totalitarian regime. Brenda's eyes narrowed. I've already explained this. The HOA board has the authority to set and enforce these standards. If you don't like it, you're welcome to leave. Leave, I scoffed. This is my neighborhood too, Brenda, and I'm not going anywhere. In fact, I think it's time we had a little chat about your so-called authority. I turned to the crowd, my voice rising. How many of you have had issues with the HOA board overstepping their bounds? Hands shot up all around the room, and the murmurs of discontent grew louder. That's what I thought, I said, turning back to Brenda. You think you can just bully us into submission, but you're wrong. We're not going to roll over and let you dictate how we live in our own homes. Brenda's face flushed with rage. That's it. I've had enough of your insolence. She snapped. Security, escort this man out of the building. But as the burly security guard approached me, I held up my hand. Not so fast, I said calmly. I think it's time we had a little chat about the legality of your so-called rules. Brenda's eyes widened as I pulled a stack of papers from my briefcase. I've done some research, and it seems your precious HOA bylaws are a little outdated. In fact, I'd say a lot of what you're trying to do here is illegal. The room erupted into cheers, and Brenda's face fell. She opened her mouth to protest, but I cut her off. Save it, Brenda. This meeting is over. And if I were you, I'd start brushing up on your knowledge of homeowners' rights. Because I'll be back, and next time, I won't be so forgiving. As I strode out of the room, I could feel the eyes of the HOA board members burning into my back. They may have thought they had the upper hand, but I wasn't about to let them bully the rest of us. This was war, and I was more than ready to fight. The following week, the tension in the neighborhood was palpable. Word had spread about the confrontation at the HOA meeting, and the residents were buzzing with a mix of excitement and unease. I could feel Brenda and her cohorts glaring at me every time I stepped outside. They were clearly furious that I had challenged their authority, and I knew they were plotting their next move. But I wasn't about to back down. This was my neighborhood, and I wasn't going to let a bunch of power-hungry wannabes run roughshod over it. I had done my research, and I was confident that the law was on my side. One afternoon, as I was tending to my garden, I heard a commotion coming from the house next door. Peering over the fence, I saw a crew of workers armed with power tools and paint cans, swarming all over the homeowner's property. My blood boiled. Those were the same tactics Brenda had threatened to use at the meeting, sending in cleanup crews to fix up homes that didn't meet the HOA's standards, and then billing the unsuspecting homeowners. I stormed over to the house, my fists clenched. What the hell is going on here? I demanded, confronting the foreman. The man looked startled, but quickly regained his composure. Sorry, sir, but we're just carrying out orders from the HOA, he said, trying to sound nonchalant. Orders? I scoffed. I don't think so. This is private property, and you have no right to be here without the homeowner's consent. The foreman's brow furrowed. But the HOA said the yard was unkempt and the paint was unacceptable. They said we had to come in and fix it. I shook my head, my anger building. Well, the HOA doesn't have that authority. This isn't a dictatorship, and they can't just barge in and start making unauthorized changes to people's homes. The foreman hesitated, unsure of how to respond. Look, I'm just the guy doing the work. If you've got a problem with it, you'll have to take it up with the HOA. Oh, believe me, I will, I growled. And in the meantime, I want you and your crew off this property right now. If you don't leave, I'll call the police and have you arrested for trespassing. The foreman's eyes widened, and he quickly gathered his crew and started packing up their equipment. As they scurried away, I turned to the homeowner, who had been watching the whole exchange, a mixture of relief and confusion on her face. Don't worry, ma'am, I said, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. The HOA has no right to do this. I'll make sure they don't try anything like this again. The woman nodded, her eyes brimming with gratitude. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm just glad someone is willing to stand up to those bullies." I smiled, feeling a sense of purpose. This was what it meant to be a true sheriff of the neighborhood, protecting the rights and freedoms of the people, no matter who tried to trample on them. As I walked back to my house, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of anticipation. The war with the HOA was far from over, but I was ready. Brenda and her cronies had picked the wrong fight, and they were about to learn a hard lesson in humility. The next HOA meeting was a powder keg waiting to explode. Brenda and the rest of the board members were seething, their knuckles white as they gripped the edges of the table. "All right, let's get this started," Brenda said, her voice dripping with barely contained rage. First item on the agenda, the unauthorized trespassing incident last week. She turned her piercing gaze on me, her eyes narrowed to slits. "I think we all know who's responsible for that little stunt." I leaned back in my chair, feigning nonchalance. "If you're referring to the illegal attempt by your hired goons to barge onto a homeowner's property without permission, then yes, I'm the one who put a stop to it." Brenda's face flushed with anger. "That was a legitimate HOA-sanctioned action to address a violation of our property maintenance policies," she spat. "You had no right to interfere." I shook my head, a small smile playing on my lips. "Actually, Brenda, I did. Your so-called policies are in direct violation of state and local laws regarding homeowners' rights. You can't just send in a crew to fix someone's property without their consent and then bill them for it." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd, and I could see the panic flickering in Brenda's eyes. She opened her mouth to retort, but I held up my hand. "Save it. I've done my homework, and I know the law is on my side. If you try to pull a stunt like that again, I'll have you and your entire board arrested for trespassing and theft." Brenda's face twisted with fury. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" she hissed. "Well, let me tell you something. This isn't over. We're not going to back down just because you've decided to play the hero." I leaned forward, my gaze unwavering. "I'm not playing at anything, Brenda. This is my neighborhood, and I'm not going to let you and your cronies run roughshod over it. If you want to fight, then that's exactly what you're going to get." The tension in the room was palpable, the air thick with the smell of confrontation. I could feel the eyes of the other homeowners on me, a mixture of fear and admiration in their expressions. Brenda opened her mouth, no doubt ready to unleash another barrage of threats and insults. But before she could speak, the doors to the community center burst open. In strode a tall, imposing figure, a police officer, his uniform crisp and his expression stern. "All right, what's going on here?" he demanded, his gaze sweeping the room. Brenda's face went pale, and she quickly straightened her posture. "Officer, there's been a misunderstanding," she said, her voice trembling. "We were just discussing some routine HOA business." The officer's eyes narrowed, and he turned to me. "Is that true, sir?" he asked, his tone skeptical. I met his gaze, my chin held high. "Not exactly, officer. You see, the HOA board has been trying to abuse their authority and violate the rights of the homeowners in this neighborhood. I was just putting a stop to their illegal activities." The officer's brow furrowed, and he turned to Brenda. "Is this true, ma'am?" Brenda's face contorted with panic, and she quickly shook her head. No, that's not at all what happened. This man is making false accusations." The officer's expression darkened, and he took a step forward. "Well, we'll let the facts speak for themselves. I'm going to need all of you to come down to the station and answer a few questions." As Brenda and the rest of the board members were led away, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. Finally, justice was being served, and the HOA's reign of terror was coming to an end. The atmosphere in the police station was tense as Brenda and the rest of the HOA board members were interrogated. I watched from the sidelines, my arms crossed over my chest, a small smile playing on my lips. "So let me get this straight," the detective said, his brow furrowed. You and your board members were attempting to forcibly enter a homeowner's property and make unauthorized improvements to their home. Brenda's face was flushed with embarrassment and anger. That's not how it happened at all, she protested. We were simply following the HOA's policies on property maintenance. It's our job to ensure the neighborhood maintains its standards. The detective shook his head, his expression grim. Ma'am, those policies of yours appear to be in direct violation of state and local laws. You don't have the authority to send in work crews without the homeowner's consent, and you certainly can't bill them for it afterwards. Brenda opened her mouth to argue, but the detective held up his hand. Save it. We've reviewed the HOA's bylaws, and it's clear that you and your board have been overstepping your bounds. In fact, it looks like you've been using your position to settle personal vendettas and harass the very people you're supposed to be serving. I couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication as I watched Brenda's face fall. She had thought she could get away with her power-hungry antics, but now she was finally facing the consequences. So, what happens now? Brenda asked, her voice trembling. The detective leaned back in his chair, his expression grim. Well, that's up to the district attorney's office, but based on the evidence we've gathered, it's safe to say you and your board members are looking at some serious charges: abuse of power, trespassing, theft, and a whole host of other violations. Brenda's eyes widened, and she opened her mouth to protest, but the detective cut her off. I'd suggest you start thinking about getting a good lawyer, ma'am. Because if you think you're going to get off with a slap on the wrist, you've got another thing coming. As the board members were led away in handcuffs, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. Finally, the residents of the neighborhood could breathe a sigh of relief, knowing that the days of the HOA's tyrannical reign were over. But as I walked out of the police station, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Brenda and her cronies were not the type to go down without a fight, and I knew they would be back, more determined than ever to cling to their power. I steeled myself for the battle ahead, knowing that the stakes were high. This was about more than just a bunch of power-hungry HOA members. It was about the rights and freedoms of an entire community, and I was ready to do whatever it took to protect them. As the sun set over the neighborhood, I couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of purpose. I was the sheriff of this town, and I wasn't about to let anyone trample on the rights of the people I had sworn to protect. The news of the HOA board's arrest spread like wildfire through the neighborhood, and the residents were electrified. Finally, the reign of terror was over, and the people could reclaim their rights. But Brenda and her cohorts were not about to go down without a fight. Within a week, they had hired a team of high-powered lawyers and were planning their counterattack. I knew I had to be ready. These were ruthless, power-hungry individuals who would stop at nothing to cling to their influence. And I was determined to make sure they didn't succeed. The next HOA meeting was a tense affair, with Brenda and her lawyers taking center stage. They had come armed with a seemingly endless array of legal technicalities and loopholes, all designed to undermine the charges against them. This is a witch hunt, pure and simple, Brenda declared, her voice dripping with false indignation. We were simply doing our jobs as the HOA board, upholding the standards and values of this community, and now we're being persecuted for it. The crowd erupted in a chorus of boos and jeers, but Brenda pressed on. The fact is, we have every right to enforce our property maintenance policies, and the actions we took were well within the scope of our authority. I rose from my seat, my heart pounding. That's a load of crap, and you know it, Brenda, I shot back. Your so-called policies are nothing more than a thinly veiled attempt to bully and intimidate the residents of this neighborhood. Brenda's eyes narrowed, and she gestured to her lawyers. That's where you're wrong, Mr. Vigilant. Our policies are perfectly legal, and we have the paperwork to prove it. One of the lawyers stepped forward, brandishing a stack of documents. As you can see, the HOA's bylaws give us the authority to take necessary actions to maintain the integrity and property values of the community, and that includes sending in work crews to address violations. I shook my head, refusing to be intimidated. Except that you're conveniently ignoring the fact that those bylaws are in direct violation of state and local laws. You can't just trample all over people's rights and expect to get away with it. The lawyer's face flushed with anger. That's where you're mistaken. We've gone over the legal fine print, and we're confident that our actions were justified. In fact, we're prepared to take this all the way to court if necessary. The crowd erupted in a chorus of outrage, but Brenda raised her hand, silencing them. That's right, folks. We're not going to back down, and we're not going to let a bunch of so-called vigilantes intimidate us. This is our neighborhood, and we're going to fight to keep it that way. I felt a surge of adrenaline coursing through my veins. This was a battle I had been expecting, and I was more than ready to take it on. Bring it on, Brenda, I said, my voice dripping with confidence. I'll see you in court. As the meeting adjourned, I could feel the tension in the air. The battle lines had been drawn, and it was clear that neither side was about to back down. This was war, and I was determined to emerge victorious. The courtroom was a cauldron of tension as the legal battle between the HOA board and the residents raged on. Brenda and her lawyers had pulled out all the stops, using every trick in the book to try and undermine the charges against them. But I wasn't about to let them off the hook that easily. I had spent weeks poring over the HOA's bylaws and the relevant laws, determined to build an ironclad case against them. As the proceedings dragged on, the judge's expression grew more and more exasperated. Let me get this straight, he said, pinching the bridge of his nose. You're telling me that your HOA board has the authority to forcibly enter a homeowner's property, make unauthorized improvements, and then bill them for the work. Brenda's lawyer nodded, his face a mask of confidence. That's correct, Your Honor. The HOA's bylaws clearly give us the right to enforce property maintenance standards, and that includes taking necessary actions to address violations. The judge shook his head, his brow furrowed. I'm sorry, but that's simply not the case. Your bylaws may claim to give you that authority, but they're in direct violation of state and local laws regarding homeowners' rights. He turned to the prosecutor, his expression grim. The evidence is clear. These individuals have been abusing their power and trampling on the rights of the very people they're supposed to be serving. I have no choice but to rule in favor of the plaintiffs. A collective cheer went up from the crowd of residents, and I couldn't help but feel a surge of triumph. Finally, justice had been served, and the HOA's reign of terror was over. But as Brenda and her cohorts were led away in handcuffs, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. These were not the type of people to simply accept defeat and slink away into the shadows. I knew they would be back, more determined than ever to cling to their power and influence. And I would be waiting for them, ready to fight tooth and nail to protect the rights and freedoms of the people I had sworn to defend. As I walked out of the courthouse, I couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of purpose. This was my neighborhood, and I wasn't about to let anyone, not even a bunch of power-hungry HOA wannabes, take it away from me. The dust had barely settled on the HOA board's defeat in court when Brenda and her cronies started to make their move. They may have been stripped of their official power, but they were far from done with their quest for dominance. I could feel the tension in the air as I walked through the neighborhood, the watchful eyes of the former board members following my every step. They were biding their time, waiting for the right moment to strike. And strike they did. One day, as I was tending to my garden, I heard a commotion coming from the house next door. Peering over the fence, I saw a group of men, dressed in dark clothing and wielding power tools, swarming all over the property. My heart raced as I realized what was happening. The HOA board had sent in their goons to carry out their threatened improvements on the homeowner's property. But this time, they had done it in the dead of night, hoping to avoid any interference. I didn't hesitate. Grabbing my trusty baseball bat, I charged across the yard, ready to confront the trespassers. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I shouted, my voice booming through the darkness. The men froze, their eyes widening with surprise. "We're just doing our jobs, mister," one of them stammered, trying to regain his composure. "Like hell you are," I growled, brandishing the bat. "This is private property, and you've got no right to be here. Now get the hell off this lot before I call the cops." The men exchanged nervous glances, clearly unsure of how to proceed. But before they could make a move, the porch light flashed on, and the homeowner emerged, wielding a shotgun. "You heard the man," the homeowner said, his voice steady and his aim unwavering. "Get off my property, or I'll fill you full of buckshot." The men scrambled to gather their tools, their faces pale with fear. As they scurried away, I couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. These HOA bullies had finally met their match, and they were learning the hard way that their days of terrorizing the neighborhood were over. As the homeowner and I watched the trespassers flee, he turned to me, a wide grin on his face. "Looks like you were right, Sheriff," he said, clapping me on the back. "These HOA Wannabes are nothing but a bunch of cowards." I chuckled, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. "Told you they wouldn't give up that easily," I replied. "But don't worry, I'll be keeping a close eye on them. If they try any more of their shenanigans, they'll be dealing with me, and the full force of the law." The homeowner nodded, his expression resolute. "Well, you can count on the rest of us to have your back, too. We're not going to let these power-hungry jerks push us around anymore." As we shook hands, I knew that this was more than just a victory for me. It was a victory for the entire neighborhood, a symbol of the power of the people to stand up and fight against those who would seek to trample on their rights. And as I walked back to my house, I couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of purpose. I was the sheriff of this town, and I wasn't about to let anyone, not even a bunch of HOA wannabes, take that title away from me.